I think literally, man, it takes one tweet from Trump to send Bitcoin to all-time highs. Like it's so simple. I think it takes one positive news event on the regulation side.
Welcome everybody into another edition of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City as we are watching a bit of a sell-off. The sell-off is worsening. I feel like this has been the case over the last few weeks. You know, we had a nice day above 102 for just a little bit as we celebrated the new year, but really ever since, including the carryover from the week prior to the new year, we've seen increasing volatility ahead of Trump's inauguration. Just want to bring up the Bitcoin chart as we kick off the week. Per usual, taking a gander at where we're at. We did see a little bit of a wick higher as we dip below that $90,000 level. Pretty important to hold depending on who you ask. If you ask me, pretty important, I would say, as that's a psychological level that people like to hold in this rally. You don't want to give back too much of the gains, but now bouncing off that a little bit higher. We'll continue to watch that throughout the hour here as we discuss that and much more in our rundown of topics to get to, including a bit of controversy in the AI DAO space. We saw over the weekend the launch of AICC, one of the tokens. Number of KOLs, number of projects included in that drop in that DAO fundraise, and the backlash was swift for those who had dumped on day one, including Bankless in their venture arm. So a lot to dig into in a little bit on the show today as we recap the drama that unfolded this weekend, including a bit of a crash out from one of those names included. We'll be chatting with the man who caught it all and saw his tweet thread go viral. We'll be discussing that with Andy from Roll Up Ventures, hopefully a bit later on in the show. But do want to kick off with kind of what we're seeing, as I said, when it comes to not just Bitcoin's price right now, but also want to bring up some of the other majors around the space as well, because the sell-off was pretty rough for a lot of those tokens that have led before. Just right now, bringing up what we're seeing from Ethereum as it too dipped below that $3,000 level and is fighting for its life right now to hold on to that one. And perhaps related to maybe some of the weakness that we saw, as always, we look at some of the fund inflows from CoinShares, taking a look back on the week that was. And in that CoinShares report for the last week, if you look at that chart, kind of weakness as we've seen to kick off the new year. Net inflows there, as you can see on the chart, relatively unchanged, which is a bit of a downer considering how much enthusiasm we saw into the end of 2024. But this time around, as a bucket, digital asset investment products recording modest inflows of just $48 million. And I mentioned Ethereum because out of all of them, Ethereum suffered the most with $256 million in outflows, which again comes at the same time that we are seeing weakness from the broader tech sector ahead of the Trump inauguration, just a week away from that now. So a lot of people wondering how much of that is built in to maybe what we're seeing, perhaps a reckoning, though we are bouncing off the lows in both the tech sell-off and the crypto sell-off. Right now, the Dow Jones just flipping into the green. So a lot to pay attention to. Earnings season kicking off. You got the VIX still above 20. Volatility still coated in here. A lot of things happening. And as we talked last week to Fred Krueger on the Bitcoin side, perhaps people think that a lot of what Trump is about to do is built in, already triggered in the price. But maybe, as he told us, maybe not the case. Maybe there's still a lot there that has not been factored in, including, I think, what we talked about with him, a lot of changes coming at the SEC. You've got Senator Lummis now becoming the chair of the crypto subcommittee in the Senate, which I think is important. You've got Senator Tim Scott taking over the Senate Banking Committee, which is obviously quite important. He posted a picture with the expected incoming SEC chair. Nothing's final until Paul is approved by Congress, but largely expected to now replace Gary Gensler when he finally dips on the 20th. So all of these things are in flux. No doubt you're going to see a lot of volatility before Paul Atkins actually gets to sit in that chair that Gary Gensler once sat in. But nonetheless, we're seeing this all shake out. And we're going to be discussing price movements and price predictions with Sean Farrell. He's been right 2 years in a row. You might say he was a little bit short of being right. At least that's what our producer says, because he likes to be a stickler with the numbers. We didn't quite hit 115. However, we did hit 108 in 2024. Pretty damn close, considering that he made that price call all the way back in January. 365 days later, I'm going to give him some wiggle room there, Texas. Our producer extraordinaire who gives no credit. However, Sean Farrell's coming back on Wednesday. We'll discuss with him what he says about some of these things. And I do want to bring up some of those. Let's just say, look, there's a lot of reasons to be a little jittery here. I understand that, especially when you break below 90. But look at the bounce back today. That exists. That's pretty strong. And I also want to bring up maybe some of the indicators that give me confidence, because I think some of these things are important when you look at some of the metrics, and no doubt Sean's going to bring up some of these on our show on Wednesday. So definitely tune into that. But one of them being SOPR. For those of you who don't know the metric, spent output profit ratio is a metric that some people look at, including this one post from Crypto Quant, in terms of market sentiment for short-term investors. When that dips, historically, you see a bit of a bounce, and that's what this chart's showing. In the past, when you have that indicator dipping below 1, it's triggered a bit of a rally in Bitcoin's price. And we saw that happen not too long ago. And so if you look at that, maybe not the best idea to be selling. However, we'll have to see where we quote-unquote close. Let's see what happens as we bounce back from below 90, back above 90, holding at 92. At least this blog post saying, look, you don't want to sell at these levels when you see that indicator dip below 1. Generally start to see some things come out of it. On the other side, you can take a look at another chart, which I want to bring up outside of that one, which is another key indicator that no doubt Sean will also dig into. One of those being the 100-day moving average of the MVRV. For those who also don't know that one, let me just explain this chart as well, which takes a look at the market value to realized value, identifying when perhaps Bitcoin's traded price is above or below what people call fair value. And in this one, you'll see that we have not come close to kind of where that indicator has topped out in prior bull cycles. Again, a lot of these metrics may change, considering the fact that we now have ETF inflows, record level of inflows, by the way, to account for off-chain, though it's technically on-chain, when they're using that ETF money to buy it. But you'll see that technically that indicator hasn't topped out at all in terms of kind of the level of 3 that we've seen in prior cycles. So if you believe that indicator, we still have a long ways to go. And I think in general, a lot of people are saying that, look, this is not the top of the cycle. And so I think that that's an important chart to show. No doubt, again, we'll dig into it with Sean on Wednesday. So if you haven't yet, if you're watching this live, go ahead and follow us. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe, retweet it, whatever you got to do. You know the platforms, you know what you got to do. Outside of that, though, of course, as we talk about, perhaps less important, considering how much bigger this market has gotten since we've started to see Michael Saylor add, I just do want to note that we did, again, get Michael Saylor adding on Monday for the 10th week in a row. This time around, Michael Saylor revealing that MicroStrategy has bought a little over $240 million of Bitcoin at an average price of $95,972 this time. So even that purchase is technically in the red, the latest one in the red as of today, depending on where Bitcoin trades. But nonetheless, Saylor's in this for the long term, and perhaps a lesson to be learned there as well as we move along in our story topic. So I'm not going to dig too much into that one. If you want to, though, head to the YouTube page and check out our deeper dive into that strategy. We heard from Jeff Park last week saying that the fears around MicroStrategy and what they're doing are overblown when it comes to potentially a quote-unquote death spiral. And I do agree with him. Jeff's a very smart guy out of Stanford, came from the hedge fund world. Smarter than I am, certainly when it comes to some of the market dynamics at play with MicroStrategy. So if he says things are fine, don't panic. Don't believe the fear that no doubt has been shared around Twitter that could happen if MicroStrategy continues to suffer with a Bitcoin decline. But nonetheless, a lot of nuances there. So check out that interview if you want to dig into it. Before we get to Andy, though, on some of the things that played out over the weekend, I also want to recap maybe some of the other catalysts to come and maybe some more water being poured, cold water being poured on some of those things, including the idea of a Solana ETF. One of the latest things that we've been watching when it comes to, hey, is the Trump administration going to be any different than the Biden administration? And right now, just want to bring up a longer term chart of Solana because, you know, a lot of this I think is built into the enthusiasm that we might be seeing among Solana holders and Solana fans. We saw it play out well with Bitcoin, maybe not so much with Ethereum, but the hope is still that you might get a Solana ETF approved in 2025. A lot of people are expecting that to happen at some point. The question is when. And if you look at this chart, pretty significant pullback from the highs on Solana around 256, now down to 178. We'll also get Sean's take on Solana on Wednesday. He had a price target of, I think, about 600, which did not manifest. So if there is one thing that Sean was not right on, of course, we call balls and strikes here. I give credit where credit's due. Maybe a little bit more painful to bring up the times where people are wrong. We did not see Solana hit that $600 price target, despite the fact that it had a lot of meme coin activity. In our crypto project of the year right now, Solana is still a main contender. And by that, I mean a semifinalist. It's only Stacks and Solana left in this thing. And so a lot of you in our Coinage community have used your NFTs to vote to get Solana into the finals. So if you use that as any indication, a lot of people are still bullish on Solana, or at least celebrating what they were able to do in 2024. A lot of questions about whether or not that carries over into 2025, particularly given all the inroads Base has made when it comes to Solana's bread and butter on the meme coin front. Maybe less so on the DePIN front, but clearly competition is heating up for the back and forth there between Solana and Base. But nonetheless, we'll see how that vote shakes up. You have until Friday to vote for your favorite crypto project between Solana and Stacks to see who's crowned in that one. Very interesting, by the way, to look at the odds of an ETF approval. That's what we are saying in our rundown of topics that we should be paying attention to in Polymarket right now. We've seen the odds come down on a Solana ETF getting approved by July 31st. If we look at this one, Texas, we're at about a 45% chance right now in that happening. And one of the big headlines to come out over the weekend is how bearish some people have turned on those odds in the VC community. That being potentially something to watch when we look at the timeline of when those ETFs might be approved. And analysts, not very optimistic. So if you look at those odds, maybe potentially something to do there on the betting side. And of course, maybe perhaps some of that being built in here to why we're seeing Solana trade down. Basically, all the analysts coming out and saying that it's not going to happen by January 25th. That was the deadline to watch. As we said off the top of the show, you got to give Paul some time. Coming into that SEC chair, not easy to turn these things around. We even heard from SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce saying that these things take time, but in the long run, 2025 looking to be a very bullish year when it comes to all of those changes at the SEC. The next deadline to approve a Solana ETF is March 11th. So kind of interesting to look at that bet on Polymarket. Essentially now, better than a coin flip. Not sure if it happens before July either. It's kind of the same idea of the ETH ETF in terms of, hey, might this catch some people by surprise? It very well may, but not happening in January from the looks of it. That would be a surprise if it did happen. But nonetheless, wanted to throw that out there as well. Outside of all of those things, there's only one last story to point to before we get to Andy to talk a little bit more about what we saw on the AICC front. And that is a very small story because I don't know how much of it would impact our audience given the fact that y'all are smart with VPNs and technically you can't use Polymarket in the US either. But I mention it because I do think it is interesting in the global scale of trying to clamp down on some of these projects. And that is that Polymarket is now blocked in Singapore. One of these projects, Polymarket, was a contender in our crypto project of the year. Obviously, Polymarket got a lot done in 2024, blew up in terms of being the king of prediction markets. But of course, still problems when it comes to regulation, not just here in the US, but now also in Singapore as the country moves to block Polymarket. That is your roundup of the biggest headlines in Web3, but not the biggest story to dig into in terms of complexity. And very happy to have on with us today, we got Andy, the co-founder of The Rollup, joining us on Coinage. There he is. What's going on, Andy? Good to see
Hey,
you, man.
this is a bit more zoomed in than I expected. Is my audio all right?
Yeah, man, you look good. You sound good. Thanks for hopping on Coinage
All right,
today.
nice.
I appreciate it. Yeah, man, we were just saying, I think that this is a big story to dig into. Before we dig into AICC and everything that you were profiling over the weekend, I know you've been patiently waiting in the wings for this show. Just kind of curious to get your take on kind of what you're seeing play out. There's a lot of panic this morning as we saw Bitcoin break 90K, Ethereum break 3K. What's kind of your take about where we are in this cycle?
Yeah, man. First of all, I appreciate you having me on. I've been checking out some of the work that you guys do, and it seems really aligned with some of the work that we've been doing at the Rollup. For those of you who don't know, the Rollup is our media company. We do a lot of education, podcast, and are working on cool ways to get the community involved on chain. I'm sure Zach has been talking to you guys about that. So, you guys are familiar with kind of how the whole coinage and media companies are ran. Anyway, that's kind of the intro. I have been in crypto for 5 or 6 years. And yeah, this doesn't really phase me at all. I mean, this dump just seems like the last straw before Trump gets inaugurated. Really feels like a time where capital allocators with longer time horizons will be buying. And it feels like those who have bought in earlier this cycle, who have done well on different meme coins or different AI tokens, are basically selling, taking their profits. And I just see right now a shift in the holder base of the top assets. So ETH, Sol, Bitcoin. I really see the institutions, I think, are the ones who will bring us to new highs from here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that while the market seems a bit kind of shaky right now, we had a pretty insane run to end off 2024, right? So at the end of the day, this was kind of expected. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes a little further, a little deeper. But I think Trump's inauguration, which is 1 week out, is a bullish event. I think this is a good buying opportunity before then. I think we're going to celebrate Trump coming into office, the
Mm-hmm.
freedom, the lack of socialism, the progressive innovation, and the broad return to what I think America is known for, with crypto being a part of it. And I think we're going to celebrate that event with some big green candles. So I'm not
Yeah,
a big short-term market trader, but that's what I'm thinking.
yeah, I think it's generally tough, I think, for a lot of people to be good short-term traders. And I think that that's why a lot of our guests come on here and say, look, I can't predict what the hell's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. But longer term, we had a conversation with Fred Krueger from the Bitcoin community just to wrap up last week. And his main point was, look, a lot of the things around the Trump administration aren't priced in. We chatted with Hester Peirce. She basically said the same thing in terms of, look, it's going to take us a little bit, but think about the night and day swing of having Gary Gensler lead the SEC versus Paul Atkins coming in, and SEC's Treasury Secretary revealing that he has a pretty big 500, I think 500K in terms of his Bitcoin holdings disclosed. So these are some pretty big pro crypto people, including everything that's happening in Congress. I mean, I assume that that's kind of a piece of what you're saying when it comes to the longer term outlook for crypto as well.
I mean, I think literally, man, it takes one tweet from Trump to send Bitcoin to all-time highs. Like it's so simple. I think it takes one positive news event on the regulation side. Like it's the trade on the short side right now seems like it's very easy to get blown out by something that would be foreseeable, which is like any sort of positive crypto news from the Trump administration. So, yeah, man, I mean, I frankly am more interested in this broader AI meta than I am in looking at the macro assets. This past weekend was crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been a whirlwind for me, right? Just I've been logging off. I'm in the mountains, so it's been nice to get some time in the snow and whatnot. But uh, broadly, I think this AI agent meta is very interesting. Probably the most interesting of all right now in crypto. I think as long as macro holds up, there's a lot more legs and a lot more interesting innovation yet to be had in that space. But clearly, there's a large, TAM for grifts because nobody really knows what's going on. Nobody
Well,
knows
that's
AI. Nobody knows crypto. Nobody understands it. So there's a lot of opportunity and also a lot of kind of minefield. So very, very interesting emerging sector there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's a good segue to get into the main reason why we invited you on. And thank you for joining us in these recap shows, because what we try and do is highlight the biggest stories from the weekend and the end of the week prior, before we all kind of tried to take some time as well to log off and get a little bit of R&R. But not so easy to do this weekend. And as you kind of spotlighted, it was a great thread kind of highlighting everything that happened with this launch. And I guess I'll let you recap kind of how you came across it, how you kind of digested it, because as you said, there's a lot going on in the AI space. Basically, a lot of tokens that may potentially also just kind of be copycats of each other when it comes to kind of a wrapper around a token that lets people kind of trade these things. But one of the big ones, which I think had a lot of promise from a lot of people in the community, was AICC, the AI Accelerate DAO. And the idea of kind of bringing together people in the space who are attached to a lot of these projects, including the founder of AI16Z, in that framework. I guess, give us the backstory in terms of how you saw this come out, because they launched the token, they gave it to a lot of KOLs, they had a lot of people attached to this drop, and some backlash when Bankless and some others dumped on day one. How did you catch this? What's been the response?
I mean, this was the peak exuberance of the last 3 months of the AI cycle that we've seen. The last 3 months, we've seen tokens go from practically, less than $1 million market cap to billions, multiple billions. And it's been an extremely exciting time and a lot of innovation. This in particular was the top, the local top for this meta, for this entire sector, in my view. It was very clear to me that this was a it was a setup in which there was very little thought into how this token was going to launch. There was no vesting. There was a massive KOL list that got a huge return, which is out of their control, but huge return with no vesting, no value created, zero contributions. And some of them cashed out multiple millions. Some of these KOLs dumped day one, including Bankless. I have little idea what this actual product is. However, they have a very, very strong community. They have some of the smartest people in the space in this sector. And so when I made this thread, I noticed that Bankless had been doing a lot of promotion of the guy Ejaz, who's behind this, the co-founder. He's been on their podcast for every week for the last 5 weeks, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. Frankly, Bankless isn't the problem here. The problem here is the way that this project used Bankless's audience and others, hyped themselves up, got a cabal in, launched this token without a product that is not worth anything, and allowed retail to buy in when it started trading with low liquidity, and then allowed all of the early participants to just dump on day one. Now, I don't think dumping on day one is the right thing to do. And this is a very public platform on DAOs.fun. So you can literally see who dumped on day one. I was not trying to attack Bankless here. What I was trying to do was stand up for what I believe is right and wrong. And this sent me over the edge. I'll admit, if I had the opportunity to get in, would I have said yes? It's a tough question. Who would say no to this?
Yeah.
Right? It's tough. So Bankless isn't the problem here. I want to make that clear. The problem is dumping. And that is what they did after the promotion. They said that they rebought. They didn't rebuy the full amount. They rebought the dollar amount. They made money. They made money on this. The guy that was running their VC tried to do some sniping and some other stuff. He completely dumped on a public wallet connected to Bankless. Tons of other influencers dumped. There was a really good tweet that I put out today. If you're on Twitter, go to my account and go to the image that I put, because I think this is the most important lesson for this. I tweeted it at like 9 a.m. my time here, so about like 7 hours ago. It was a chart of the latest chart of this AI Accelerate token. And I mean, we can even pull up the chart now on Dextrainer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably worse. But let's just start with the tweet.
Yeah, I'm bringing
because
it
this
up right
tweet is
now,
very
and
important.
I think to your point, just to echo it, by the way, Andy, in terms of
Yeah, man.
where the outrage came from, it is kind of like disclosures and figuring this out and dumping on day one. The backlash, apart from the KOLs, that's one thing, but then, like you said, kind of having the guy on leading up to this launch and the idea of Bankless spotlighting it, and then not only having both their hosts have a personal allocation, but then also Bankless VC dumping on day one, like you said. It's not a good look, and I think a lot of people are rightfully outraged, including myself, by the way, in terms of what we're trying to do here at Coinage. It gives a bad taste in everyone's mouth when it comes to DAOs, but this is the chart that you tweeted.
Yeah, and so I totally agree. Um, and I think the most important point to learn from this is to scroll down just a bit further to the second tweet and just hold on to that second tweet. Maybe a hot or unpopular take, but selling on day one is actually fine if the rules of the token are no vesting. Agreed. The person to blame is actually the founder who created such a stupid setup and advisors slash value add investors who did not recommend a better one. Highly agreed. The only exception is if you have promoted the token extensively prior to launch or within close proximity to the selling, then selling is obviously extremely bad. This is where Bankless, I believe, is at fault.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a fund manager and a founder tells you to buy this, no vesting, and you buy it and sell it day one without promoting it, then you have just accepted a good deal from a total idiot. Founder is to blame. Generally agree with some nuance, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
If you promote it and then sell it day one, then that dynamic changes, obviously. I'm not saying Bankless promoted the token. They did not. But they put this guy on their show for 5 weeks straight and were hyping up the AI agent meta. And this is what happened. So, I mean, put two and two together here as to what was going on behind the scenes. And I think this project is cooked for the foreseeable future. I would
Yeah.
never buy it. And I have so many unanswered questions. There's actually one more tweet that I think it's worth pulling up that I think you and I can kind of go back and forth on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before we get
Maybe
to
I can
that one
just,
too,
yeah, man.
there's one more thing that I kind of wanted to spotlight too, as you bring all of that up, which is also, I think, I think OX Ultra did a great job in terms of bringing this dashboard
Yes.
up. This is a really great tool, and
Incredible
I would
work.
encourage everybody. We're obviously going to link to this in the full episode here today, but this dashboard was pretty crazy, and I don't know if this is kind of where you saw all this play out too, but it lists essentially everybody who got an allocation and tracks exactly what they did with this. And it's pretty eye-opening because I think the other piece of this, Andy, is I don't know how many people, just to maybe use Bankless as an example here, I don't know how many people realized that all of this was public because either they didn't realize they were using, wallets that had been connected to their Twitter accounts or what.
I know.
I think a lot of people,
That's why this
and one of the big
crazy.
things is I think a lot of people got caught with their pants down here and were not prepared for kind of everyone to see this. So shout out to OX Ultra. By the way, both you and I believe it's a she, I think. Maybe it is. Maybe we're post-gender world here. But that account and you, I think, deserve a lot of credit for bringing all this to people's public attention because there are things like this that happen all the time that might not ever be discussed. And I think unless we as a space flag those things and say, hey, maybe this isn't good, as you're kind of highlighting the Kobe tweet here, I don't know how any of this changes. Because it was shocking, by the way, to also see how much of this was maybe just accepted as like, look, this is the way that it is. And I don't know if you saw, it's now deleted, but the tweet from the founder of AI16Z, who he also DM'd me, but this tweet is no more.
As well. He posted a massive rant.
Yes.
The other day.
In the rant, he
just
told people, I believe, to fuck their own face, if I'm getting that part correct. But it was
provocative and just completely out of line.
Well, what do you make of the way that maybe the people out there, a lot of people said, look, this is the norm in Web3. What do you want to do about it? I mean, are you on the same page as me where it's like, how else do we fix this?
Yeah, forget that. Look, man, DAOs.fun is a really cool platform. It's brand new. It's a lot of experimentation. I don't think there's a problem with participating in it. In fact, there are going to be some cool sales in the next several weeks that I'm going to participate in. You do it on a public wallet. You don't dump day one. It's so simple that's it. That's all your responsibility is, I think, as a KOL or investor, especially if you promote it. The founder, the vesting, this is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And frankly, I just don't think it's right. So there's a sale that's happening actually as we speak. The VIPs who have a lot of allocation, they have vesting. The ones with a very, very small allocation, they don't have vesting. So that's like at least a start. But This is just a crypto-wide industry problem that is much
Hmm.
deeper than this. And I don't think it's VC's fault. I don't think it's like influencers' fault. I don't think it's any one specific person's or entity's fault. It's just a broad systemic kind of corruption. And as far as Shaw goes, I mean, look, I don't really have much to say. I mean, you read his content and you make your own opinion. Um, he's is been very uh, straightforward and polarizing recently, and so that's that is a polite way to put it. And so I think what they're building is great, but the personality arc of founders is something very very important, I think. And once you go down a certain route, it's hard to pull that back. And I think that's
I
kind of what happened with Bankless here. But I feel like I didn't try to take Bankless down or spite them in public. I was just presenting information that I found, which happened chronologically, where I didn't actually realize that they were selling until like I checked the chain and I talked to Ultra and I checked the dashboard. And then that's when this thing really got picked up and got out of hand. And then crypto Twitter took that and did with that what they do. I want to make it clear that I was presenting this information in a diplomatic fashion, and it was very clear that I was standing for what I believed is to be right. What
Yeah,
crypto
and you can
Twitter did,
see, like you said, you could see the impact of that too in terms of this chart with the token now down 40% afterwards, which I think, again, you raise very
wow,
good points because
same day.
transparency is what the space is all about as far as I believe as well. And in terms of kind of revealing, hey, here's this wall of sell pressure that may exist behind your back. I think it's important for people to have that information before buying a
And
token.
think about the people who bought on day one, thinking that this was a great project. They were promised by this guy on Bankless for weeks and on Twitter, and they didn't get allocations, so they were going to buy day one because it was the best thing, and they're completely screwed. And it's those people who lose every time this stuff happens. It's the same freaking playbook. And so, look, man, I don't want to get too worked up here, but you know,
No, I think
this
it's
is
I think it's
this is the
important.
situation.
No, I think there are certain stands that you have to make. As an industry, we've seen these stands played out. And I will give Bankless credit because one of those stands happened on their show, by the way. It was the SBF Eric Voorhees debate. I think there were stands made there where it's like, hey, do we really want to give in to this idea of letting regulatory capture benefit the FTXs of the world? That happened on Bankless. I think a lot of people give Bankless credit for that. At the same time, you can't look at Bankless and say, okay, they purport themselves to be a DAO. They launched this bank token that kind of tanked, and then spin out the Bankless brand into being Bankless Ventures VC, where the value capture happens. And you have something like this happen where Bankless Ventures VC or Bankless VC dumps on day one, and all this plays out in public, and you basically have the only thing being, hey, we made a mistake with the wallet, not exactly a full-throated apology in terms of what exactly played out. And I think you are right to hold their feet to the fire and say, look, is this what we want as a space? And we'll let everyone make their calls there. But I guess moving forward, Andy, what do you make of maybe potentially what this needs to do to change? By the way, as you said, a very hot sector right now when it comes to the AI space today, perhaps seeing a lot of profit taking perhaps in the space. And I do want to bring up one more tweet, kind of maybe potentially connecting the dots between that meltdown that we just highlighted on Twitter and AI16Z as well, because I think it's kind of interesting. But what do you make of the space in general? Where do we go from here? You mentioned DAOs still kind of pursuing the same idea of party rounds. What say you
Yeah,
about the space?
yeah, man. I mean, if you're still on the screen share, a really good website is cookie.fun, literally cookie.fun. But I mean, look, this is the top of the AI cycle. Um, it was just so, it was just such that these events happened at the top. Like it's very representative of the top, but it's not over. I believe that this is an emerging sector that's going to have the most upside in crypto
Mm-hmm.
this year. It's going to be the most interesting thing in crypto this year. I think that may be consensus view now, but I think it's very, very evidently clear. And so, what do I make of the sector? So it's kind of broken up right now into infrastructure, which are these frameworks, agents, so the actual agents themselves, launch pads to like launch different agents. You're now seeing specialized and personalized agents. You're seeing agents with speaking capabilities. You're seeing this agent slop on Twitter, which is rehashing garbage in your mentions being pushed back. You're seeing agent fatigue right now. That's why the market's topping. And
Hmm.
you just saw exuberance and greed. Next 6 months will be categorized by way better agents, extremely fast pace of progression, very, very good products with legitimate teams behind them, and massive, massive launches and massive rallies in some of the tokens on this website. It's just about the right ones. And so this site I love. It's a great
Hmm.
website. And I think this is the next DeFi llama for 2025.
Interesting.
It's the next, token terminal. You know, this site and Kaido are the two sites that I think will have the most amount of alpha in 2025.
Okay, that's important to know. As I said, as I explained to you over the weekend, by the way, in appreciation of your post and highlighting all this, Coinage does nominate people who we think are adding value to the space in general, writ large, as a DAO, as a community-owned media outlet. Our whole premise is, I think, to solve a lot of the problems that you flagged, which is how do people win together in a way that can happen legally. That's what we're trying to do here with our NFT holders who have helped make Coinage a thing. And now, as we approach January, we're going to be paying out the first NFT project here in the US to pay out a dividend to those NFT holders. So, nominating you, my friend, for a lot of the work you did here and flagging all this stuff, because I do think it is really, really important. And in general, love the takeaways for our audience to know about Cookie.fun. If there is one that you enjoy, what do you think is the main meta when it comes to the AI agents and the way that they will potentially scale here? What's kind of the one narrative amidst the noise, the signal to focus on for some of these projects? Because I think a lot of people, including Travis Kling, we had him on the show saying, like, look, this is the big meta, but none of them have actually done much yet. They're all just kind of bots tweeting things, and maybe AIXBT has become the main mind share of what's happening on crypto Twitter. But what are your kind of things to watch for some of these projects on Cookie.fun to maybe say, look, these are the ones that are going to break away from the pack?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the reality is you need to be researching and paying attention. I think that the key differentiations here is going to be the pace of innovation of the actual agents themselves in terms of their ability to become more personalized for individuals and customized. I think those are the big two trends. And so I would pay attention to the frameworks that have the most successful agents built on top of them, as well as new frameworks that have been around for a while that haven't had as much hype as this first cohort. You need to do a little bit of digging, but there are clear winners that have much smaller market caps than AI 16Z virtuals
Mm-hmm.
that have better technology, founders, and I think overall chances of success. And so there's alpha right now that is completely out there in the market. You need to have steel hands. They're very volatile. You need to believe. But
Mm-hmm.
there are some clear winners that will be repriced higher in the less than $500 million market cap range, which is absurd, but um, that are going to be repriced to the billions, I believe. And I think some of these first movers will still do well, but I don't think that's where the alpha is anymore. And so that's
Well,
kind of my takeaway.
writ large, one last question for you, Andy, as we kind of wrap up here on our recap show. But kind of one of the interesting things that I saw from Mike Dudas kind of tweeting about, obviously a big Solana bull, but the idea of kind of where some of the money's flowing. And I do wonder if, obviously today might not be the day to be talking about a resurgence for Ethereum, just kind of given where pricing is, but we are seeing Base kind of take a lead in terms of maybe potentially becoming one of those places you mentioned, virtuals, where people can make bets in general on maybe some of the activity to come through. I don't know if there's a good way to kind of stomach some of that volatility by making bets across the board or just buying the ecosystem. What do you kind of make of maybe Base's role in all this in enabling some of it to now happen on Ethereum? Maybe it's longer term.
Yeah,
Maybe it's more boring, but a question nonetheless.
I think Base saved Ethereum here. It's funny. It's like when Solana had meme coins, all the Ethereum people were like, bad chain, shitty meme coin chain. Now that Base has meme coins, it's like, oh, meme coins are great. AI is great. It's funny how Ethereum works. Um, and so, yeah, man, I mean, overall, Base is the current winner for Ethereum and the AI meta, and I think it continues to be. Um, but I think chains like Abstract and other rollups will kind of show the entire community this year what an
Hmm.
actual good chain is. I don't think we've scratched the surface on what an actual good L2 is yet. So that's all I'll say there.
Right on, man. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on as always, and hope to have you in the community. As I said, coinage.media is where people can learn more about our DAO, and appreciate everything that you do at the roll. I want to give that one last shout out. I don't know if we brought it up, but let's give it a little shout out here in Texas. Let's bring this one up too. Andy, thanks again for making the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Really great platform that you've built so far here. Respect the work that you guys have done, and excited to collaborate more in the future.
Yeah, for sure, man. And everybody should go check out the roll up as well. There it is. Appreciate it, Andy. Thanks again for the time. That'll do it for us here on Coinage as we wrap up all the big headlines in and around Web3. Our thanks to Andy. Our thanks to also OX Ultra for the dashboard as we highlight maybe perhaps a launch gone awry. As always, you can catch all of our stories at coinage.media. If you haven't yet, subscribe, follow us. And again, for Andy, for myself, for everybody here at Coinage, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.